Well, thank you both so much for those insightful talks. So I have a question for Peggy in particular. I really like your idea that the world also changes in metamorphoses, so that not only do these humans get changed into animals, but that the world also is a subject of metamorphosis through its suffering. And I was just wondering if there were other ways in which you saw the world described as human other than suffering in this story, or in others, or like if there are other ways in which the world is demonstrated to have some sort of agency, human agency, in the Ovid Mahalise.
So, certainly, the world is enmeshed with the human in all of the metamorphoses, right? Where people become rivers or fountains or rocks or whatever. And I am trying to be careful not to describe human agency as the same as animacy. So I'm trying to think about the way that these theological rhetorics and use animacy to think about something that is difficult to grasp from their theological perspective, right? So that and I don't want to assimilate animacy to the human or to suggest that animacy means agency, but rather to locate it in lamentation, really, which is the way I see suffering.
Could I just quickly actually add on to that?
Yeah.
I was wondering, thinking about how medieval animacy is conceptualized in contrast to, say, the way that Jane Bennett describes it. For Bennett, there's no speech, right? And it seems that speech is so important in the conception of
Yes,
animacy that you
yes,
use. Is that
yes,
true? Yeah.
yes, that is true. And I am not thinking with Jane Bennett, but with Mel Chen, really. Although I'm not sure that the notion of hierarchy is really what I want to get at. But yeah, I'm that is another reason I'm staying away from the notion of. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to go to agency.
Yeah.
In relation to that.
Any question? Next.
Thank you. I really like the idea of an alien unseen, though I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And I guess something I thought was in common between these two very interesting papers was um, a, a, um, a deliberate extending of the vocabulary that we normally associate with certain kinds of entity to the cosmos. And in Peggy's talk, there is a view which I think is absolutely right of of cosmology as a psychology, effectively, and that in your Frédéric there was much more of a view of the cosmos as a physiology, though I mean you used the various descriptions that turned around the notion of the body, and I'd be interested to hear how far each of the speakers would push these ideas of the cosmology as psychology or as physiology.
Please, because I spoke too much. Already spoke too much.
No, it's
So
fine. Go ahead.
okay, yeah. So your question is about the kind of relation between cosmology, psychology, physiology. Um, in the environmental thought nowadays, or in general, how they have to be associated, how they have to be racing together, or I'm sorry if I was not able to exactly understand.
No, this wasn't a question about your thought in general, though it could lead to that, but more a question of where the thought of your paper might lead if you went on thinking in that vein. What with the material that you were talking about in your paper, in this case the Tournier novel and its relation to different historical views, conceptions of meteorology, what conclusions might that lead you to? How far would you push this sense of cosmology as a physiology?
As a physiology. Oh, I don't know. As a I was thinking about, the idea of correspondences, for example, the fact that John Donne says that the Copernican revolution was, in a way, the destruction of any kind of correspondences. And I think he was wrong, because the Copernican revolution and the post-Copernican universe recreated a certain kind of correspondences. So I think he was wrong. A new kind of cosmos, in fact, was conjured up through the Copernican revolution. But I will use, because I was thinking about the relation between cosmology and physiology now, but I will use, what Frederick Jameson says. I think it is in Matter and Form, when he speaks about Baudelaire and correspondences, and he says basically that the goal of a correspondence, at least in Baudelaire's poetry, is not to create an identity, but to highlight differences. And so I will use, in fact, not only Baudelaire's poetry, but also the term of correspondence, not in order to say that there is a sort of identity, material identity, whatever the kind of identity between physiology and cosmology. But the goal will be, in fact, to see their articulation without melting them. And so the goal, if I use the metaphor of the body, in the end, it will be to disrupt this metaphor, because the body of the Anthropocene, or let's say the Earth as a planet, is something from which it's something that, in fact, should not be seen as a body, in fact, because if really any body is disrupted from the inside by a kind of outside or a kind of heterogeneity, then the metaphor of the body, in the end, should not be the most accurate metaphor to speak about, for example, our planet, but in the end, to speak about maybe any entity, human or non-human.
And I'll have to think about cosmology as psychology. I'm not sure I quite get that, but how that would work. But I would say that I just take that Lynn White essay as a provocation for what seems to me a question about recognition, feelings, and suffering. And I think that animacy is the answer to that question, but as you can see, I'm still trying to work out how to articulate that answer.
Perhaps have one last question.
Thank you both. Those were terrific talks. A couple thoughts. One is Lynn White, who was a fabulous scholar and wrote some wonderful, wonderful books about innovation and diffusion of technology from earlier centuries. I'm not sure he's right in his rant against Christianity as the cause of or the origins of the mastery of nature. I mean, I'm thinking in particular of a recent book by Andres Wolf called The Invention of Nature, which is kind of a monograph about Alexander Humboldt as sort of the first holistic earth thinker, if you will, which isn't necessarily true either. But her point was it really had origins in classical Greece, with Aristotle and so on. So that said, I wanted to make a point about, I liked your point, Dr. Renaud, about the Anthropocene being sublunar, defined in terms of detritus in space. But when I think about that, I have a kind of a problem with it, because it's 250,000 miles to the moon, right? And the Anthropocene sublunar detritus extends only maybe a few hundred miles off the surface of the Earth. So there's kind of a discrepancy between thinking of it as truly sublunar when it's only like 1% of the distance to the moon, roughly. So, I like the idea, but I'm not sure it really works when you think of the actual numbers that run, behind it.
I totally agree with you about Lynn White, and I didn't have time to talk. His work on technology is deeply important and recognized as accurate, very accurate, and I just didn't have time to nuance that, but I agree with you completely.
Yeah, about the moon, even for Aristotle, the problem was not a problem of distance, right? It was a problem of epistemological, ontological, cosmological separation between two worlds. And so I am interested in the fact that, in a way, the Anthropocene, if we understand, in a way, this word, this concept, as the acme, the summum, the supreme expression of the dominant ecological thought, if the Anthropocene is like a body that in a way, the body of expression, the illustration of a new kind of geocentrism, right? It is my hypothesis. Then, of course, the limits under which the Anthropocene defined its own body is a kind of new moon, right? A kind of and the situation in which this new geocentrism is produced. The limits, thanks to which this new body defines itself, has the specificity of being produced by the Anthropocene itself, right? So I'm sorry. I mean, I don't know if what I said right now made sense. I'm not sure. Right. So I will try to say that again later.
Well, thank you. I want to thank our panelists for this really stimulating and interesting set of talks, and all of you. And please take a quick break and be back here at 11:30 for the next panel.